Another question?
Hello, my name is Breck Donahue. I'm from the Office of Justice Programs. My question was, considering this place-based approach, do you find it's more effective or only effective with crimes that are sort of place-based? And what I mean by that is I'm thinking drug markets, I'm thinking prostitution, which seems to be sort of a place-based crime versus perhaps like property crimes. I'm wondering, or muggings, or those kinds of things. Is it really going to just focus on specific types of crimes, or do you find that it sort of bleeds into other areas?
Well, I want to answer that question, but another question for the person in the back. I think one of the things we really need to know is what are the demographic makeup of these hotspots. It's a very hard question to answer. We have some data in Seattle. I'm going to actually try to look at it. You can't get census data at this low in aggregation, but it's a very good question. I'm going to think about it. So maybe we should be in touch. It's an interesting kind of issue you've raised. But anyway, this issue of what about types of crime, I chose the prostitution hotspot and the drugs and violence hotspot because I wanted to pick a type of crime that everybody thought to be displacement. In other words, I chose those types of crime because I thought everybody would tell me, what are you kidding me, prostitutes? They're just going to walk around the corner, right? So I purposely in that study didn't choose types of crime that people actually think less that they just move around easily. So you mentioned some ideas. If you take things like robberies, actually, they're quite place-focused. Robberies tend to congregate around bus stops, subway stations in an area that's a little bit dark. In other words, what do you need for a robbery to occur? You need someone that's worthwhile to rob. You need an offender who can get there. You need a place that offers some opportunities, maybe a dark spot or a place that can't be seen. Those three things converge, and then you have a robbery. So robberies are not spread throughout the city. The other example you gave, one was robbery and one was property crime. One of the most important findings, separate from this, was a finding in the UK by a group of researchers in which they found, cops used to come to people's houses and say, oh, you've been robbed, don't worry, burglar. You've been burglarized, don't worry, you won't be again. You know what it turns out? That if you've been burglarized once, you're much, much more likely to be burglarized again. So place is important. And we find that also with burglary, that offenders tend to work in areas. In other words, not just one house gets burglarized, a whole series of them. They tend to it's like fishing. They fish in a certain area, then they've cleaned out the area, and this is interesting. In this case, they tend to move on to another area to fish in. But interestingly enough, they come back when the people have managed to buy some stuff so they can come back again, because the opportunities that made that a good place often still make it a good place, because sometimes citizens don't increase crime prevention, etc. Now, one should be careful about this. Does this mean every crime is geographically focused? Does this mean every type of prevention should be based on place, as I've said? No. Those are things we need to learn more about. In some cities, car thefts are highly focused. Now, one thing that's highly focused is where you find the cars, usually near some place where they're selling parts or something like that. But in Jersey City once I did an analysis, and I found out that the city was terribly urban, intense. And it was pretty spread out. It wasn't as focused. So I'm not saying there aren't crimes that are focused, but crime overall is incredibly focused by place. And just because something is obvious does not mean it's not an important insight. Sigmund Freud wrote a book, The Interpretation of Dreams. It's 600 pages, something that says the dreams have something to do with the way you feel. That would not be a new idea to the people in this audience. In the 19th century, it was a pretty new idea. I think it's like displacement. The fact that you don't get displacement, you get diffusion of crime control benefits, is a startling idea, but it makes sense once you start thinking about it. Crime is attached to places, because places are part of that equation, I think a very central part of that equation. So it's not surprising. Burglaries of businesses, do they occur in a residential area? No. So when you start thinking about it, you can, without any empirical work whatsoever, you can start isolating a bit what you're developing, what you're knowing. So what I'd say to you is we need to learn much more about this. And if I can just give one, I don't know who's in this audience, etc. But I've written a paper for the Harvard Executive Session on science and policing. And one of the things I point out is the National Institute of Justice had $7 million last year for all social science research, policing and everything else. The National Institutes of Health have over $1 billion a year. The Dental Institute has a few hundred millions a year. The National Institute of Education has $167 million a year for a cutting-edge research project. So what I'd say here is that there's an awful lot of your bang. You are getting an amazing amount of information on a very small amount of investment. So if I suspect this is preaching to the choir, but if there's someone here not from the choir, then I'd say that it's really time to invest in crime prevention, because there's a lot we can know, and a lot we can know that will help us be more effective. I should note tomorrow there's a congressional briefing that our center is doing, the Center for Evidence-Based Crime Policy. I hope you don't mind. Cynthia, where is it? Do you mind?
It'll be at the Capitol, at the Visitor Center at the Capitol Senate side.
So at the Capitol at 9 in the morning or 10? 10:30 in the morning at the Visitor Center. There are these panels we run on evidence-based crime prevention with people talking from different perspectives about what we learn. And what I've got to say, it's amazing how much science has been produced on so little research support.
It would be a great thing to hear that those presentations and to hear what we've learned about what actually works in crime prevention and control. It's really quite amazing. This is fascinating today. Are there any other questions?
David, first let me compliment you on your insights in looking at these issues. I'm wondering whether or not the existing model that we have for providing the police services will be able to focus sufficiently on place-based policing to have a significant impact. We want to prevent crime, and if it's robbery, we want to make sure there's enough light in the street, but police have no power to over the street lights. That's a governmental function at the municipal level, but it's not anything that the police have power over. And I wonder whether or not there's more of an interdisciplinary approach needed in terms of the organic model that the police will use in the future to leverage place-based policing to have a significant impact.
I think you're right on target. There are two things that need to be done. In other words, and let me say at the outset, the one thing that needs to be done is the police chiefs and others need to start thinking about this. How could you reorganizing police? This may be the type of problem that should not be handled purely by researchers, but either with really with the intersection of researchers and practitioners. So I'd say at the Police Foundation, you should start thinking about these issues and bringing the police in to start thinking organizationally. But in some sense, the police have been struggling with this issue at least since the early 1980s. When Herman Goldstein wrote his paper on problem-oriented policing, at that time, he thought the police needed to focus in. He wasn't only talking about places, but he thought they needed to focus in on problems. And that article, if you read it, is really a cookbook, I always say. The immediate thing that Herman did was to go into how the police could do it. And he talked about the police partnering with other agencies, like housing or liquor law enforcement or whatever the other agencies are, to do something about crime prevention. So the police have been struggling for years, third-party policing, involving prosecutors especially, using civil ordinances to do something about crime. These partnerships, these ideas have been developing for years. So I don't think it's a really big step. I think it's really just using some of the ideas we've had so far and developing them. Place puts a kind of slightly different complexion to it, but in some sense, many of these ideas have been developing anyway. The third-party policing idea, for example, I believe developed in Oakland, California, with a program called Beat Health, developed by a sergeant in the Oakland Police Department, in which what they did was pick out houses that had people using drugs and selling drugs at the houses, and the Beat Health was making those places healthy. And they used the courts, they worked with the prosecutors to use the courts to say to the landlords, if you don't change this is being closed out. The city is not going to allow you to rent this to people, etc. So we've been thinking about this for a bit. I think we need to think about it more.
Yeah.